Welcome to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast for couples who struggle with infertility and want to fulfill their dreams of becoming parents. In this podcast, you'll learn actionable strategies to deal with infertility from Dr. Michael Chapman, or Prof as he's affectionately known. Prof is the co-founder of IVF Australia and is a leading Australian infertility specialist who has helped over 3,000 couples realise their dreams of becoming parents. To access previous episodes packed with ideas, solutions and tips that actually work, head over to Dr. Chapman's IVF podcast on iTunes. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.
That first cry of a baby born after the long journey of IVF remains one of the most beautiful experiences in the world. As an obstetrician and an IVF specialist, I've had the privilege of experiencing this over many thousands of times in my long career, but I still remain moved by each baby's first cry. It signifies the end of a long journey and the beginning of a new life. This is Professor Michael Chapman, co-founder of IVF Australia and host of the IVF Journey podcast. Thanks for tuning in. To access all the previous episodes, head over to my website, www.theivfjourney.com, and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu. You'll also be able to find the various services that we provide at IVF Australia. I'm Professor Michael Chapman. I've been a fertility specialist for over 35 years. I've seen IVF go from an experimental procedure to now a mainstream treatment that has helped hundreds of thousands of couples in Australia have babies. Personally, our clinic at Cogra has produced over 3,000 babies in the 20 years that I've been running it. Fertility is a basic desire of most couples, that their life revolves around the possibility at some point in their lives of having children to foster, to carry, to look after, nurture, to follow in their footsteps as they grow up. To not be able to have a child is a majorly confronting issue. Couples who face this are psychologically traumatized and become incredibly desperate. Desperation that takes them to their general practitioner, to a specialist, through treatment after treatment, and some even touring the world to try and find the answer to their problem and to achieve the pregnancy they so desperately want. The basic definition of infertility that we learn at medical school, that I teach medical students, is 12 months of trying without success. The issues that can lead to that 12 months delay is primarily related to the poor capacity the human has in reproducing. You may not realize it, but one cycle of creating an egg and having intercourse at the right time only has a 15% chance of producing a baby. Now, 15% month on month on month does add up. And so by 12 months, some 90% of couples will have achieved their goal. But for the other 10%, there is potentially a long, hard road ahead of them. The statistics say that 1 in 6 couples in Australia will suffer from infertility at some point in their reproductive lives. The major causes of infertility relate to 3 basic functions. The first is that the woman has to ovulate, to make an egg. And there is a group of women, the commonest diagnosis of which is polycystic ovaries, who do not ovulate on a regular basis. And they need help really before the 12 months time frame has passed. So if a woman is having irregular periods, more than 35 days between them, it is highly likely that some of those cycles are not going to be creating an egg and releasing an egg. And obviously, you can't get pregnant without an egg. The second major factor is sperm. Obviously, there's a need for the male to produce sperm in sufficient numbers and of high enough quality to be able to achieve the fertilization of an egg. So the other main issue is obviously the male. The male has to produce sperm of sufficient numbers and of sufficient quality to fertilize an egg. Now, we all know that, in fact, men produce millions of sperm, and we still don't quite understand why we need so many when you only need one sperm to fertilize an egg. But they have quite a journey. There has to be more than 15 million sperm per mil of ejaculate placed in the vagina, ejaculated into the vagina, and those sperm have a long journey compared with their size to find their way up into the uterus, up into the fallopian tube to meet the egg coming the other way. So semen quality is a basic parameter that's required to achieve a pregnancy. Third issue that we always investigate is that the woman's anatomy is normal, that she does have open fallopian tubes so that an egg can travel down from the ovary and then the sperm can find their way up from the vagina. Blockage of the tubes is a significant cause of infertility. With those three basic things in mind, when a couple come to see me in the clinic, they're the things I will be investigating. We can check for ovulation with a simple blood test in the second half of the woman's menstrual cycle. We can test the sperm by the husband producing a sperm sample and it being assessed by our scientists in the laboratory. And we can test whether the tubes are open by three different ways, two using as an outpatient and the third being an inpatient procedure looking inside with keyhole surgery to check that the tubes are open by flushing them through with a blue dye. The outpatient procedures are either an X-ray, which is undertaken a bit like a pap smear, where the cervix is seen, the neck of the womb is seen, and a tube put inside it, and then dye squirted up through that. And on the X-ray screen, we can actually see the dye going through the fallopian tubes. There's a similar approach using ultrasound to watch the fluid pass up through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes. So having done those three basic investigations, something like 80% of couples who present to me with infertility will find a cause. However, there's still the 20% fall into the category of unexplained infertility. And this is probably just the result of the roll of the dice. As I mentioned earlier, the chances of pregnancy in each month is around 15%, which, if you think about it, is 1 in 6, which is like a dice. You roll the dice, on the first month you throw a 6, and guess what? You're pregnant. But we've all had the experience playing board games that you can roll a dice again and again and again and still not get a 6. The luck is against you. And probably that explains a significant number of that group that we call unexplained infertility after 12 months of trying. That said, it's almost certain that there are things that we don't understand that do cause infertility. Following the basic investigations, if they're all normal, I must say I encourage couples to continue to try for another 2 or 3 months because there is some evidence that flushing through the fallopian tubes is of value in improving pregnancy rates. There's a spike in the pregnancy rate in the first 2 months after having the tubes flush through. I speak from personal experience, in fact. My 2 children were conceived in the month after my wife had such procedures done, when we were having trouble getting pregnant. Somewhat ironic that a fertility specialist should have trouble with conceiving. Once we've established a diagnosis, then the question is about treatment. IVF, in vitro fertilization, was originally developed for those women with blocked tubes because they're in that situation, the sperm and the eggs can't get together because they can't meet in the fallopian tube. And so by taking the eggs out of the woman and putting them with sperm in a laboratory, a pregnancy was created and the embryo is put back into the uterus, bypassing the fallopian tubes. That was the reason it was developed. However, today it is used for far more widespread causes of infertility. In fact, almost every form of infertility is ultimately being treated with IVF because it is now so highly successful. It is particularly useful in situations where the husband's sperm is of poor quality. As I mentioned earlier, the need for sperm is actually only for one. It only takes one sperm to fertilize an egg. You don't need millions of sperm if you've got an egg sitting in a dish in a laboratory. So with a technique called ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where the scientist selects one sperm and using a very fine needle injects that sperm inside the egg, we can create a pregnancy. And so for men with very low sperm counts or very poor quality sperm, we can circumvent the natural process that requires more than 15 million sperm per mil to be present in the vagina, with success rates equivalent to the success rates of women with blocked tubes. If there is unexplained infertility, then the way forward is with intrauterine insemination. Now, experts in the field do vary in their belief in IUI, intrauterine insemination, as a form of treatment. It certainly has a lower pregnancy rate per month than IVF. However, it is significantly less invasive since we don't have to take the eggs out of the woman. She doesn't have to have an operation. It also has a slight problem in that when we stimulate the ovaries to produce a good egg, we may produce more than one egg. So multiple pregnancies are slightly more common in IUI than they are with IVF, where we only put one embryo back at a time. We mentioned earlier ovulation as a basic need to produce a baby. So women who are not ovulating may have that problem because their brain, where the hormones that drive the ovary come from, is not producing them in appropriate amounts, that the pituitary gland is misbehaving, and we end up with an ovulation. Treatment for that has been around for much longer than IVF, in fact, and relatively simple treatments using tablets is the initial step. A drug called clomiphene can induce ovulation in something like 80% of women with anovulation due to polycystic ovary syndrome. And of those 80%, some 60% will be pregnant within 6 months. If the woman's ovaries don't respond to clomiphene, and there's a newer drug called letrozole, which works in a slightly similar way. But if the woman doesn't respond to either letrozole or clomiphene, we then move on to using pituitary hormone equivalents, a hormone called follicle-stimulating hormone, to make the ovary respond by producing an egg. With that stimulation, something in the order of 95% of women will ovulate and will produce high levels of success in terms of pregnancy, albeit the month-on-month rate does not exceed the basic 15% that I've talked about before. So one has to be patient if we're doing ovulation induction. I find today that many couples won't have that patience, and that after 3-4 cycles of not being successful, they want to move on to IVF. I'm not sure this is the correct use of IVF, because a little more patience could probably avoid going that far. But that's a discussion that one has between the specialist and the patient. I spend a lot of my time coaxing couples to try a bit harder for a bit longer. Those comments are fine if the woman is under 35. But sadly, for me, because I know what the success rates are, over half of my patients are more than 38 years of age. And indeed, age is becoming the major problem in relation to fertility. That changes in our society that have led to delaying childbearing to the late 30s is having a big impact on the ultimate possibility of an individual couple even having a baby. There seems to be a desire of younger people to be settled, i.e. have the house, the car, the job, the career, before thinking about childbirth. Compound this with a much later time of settling down with an individual partner, and we end up with the problem we have of many couples getting to 38, 39, thinking it's time for a baby, but unfortunately already the biological clock is working against them. The 15% per cycle that I was talking about has now dropped to 10%, and over 40 drops to 5% per month. So that in 12 months, the chances of success are so much lower than they were when they were younger. And sadly, IVF and all the fertility treatments that I can throw at you, if you're in that situation, do not overcome that basic biological problem. The quality of the eggs declines with age. So fertility is a common problem. It has multiple causes. We have many fantastic treatments that we didn't have when I first started my career as a specialist in infertility. And so today we do offer infertile couples significant hope, but to be realistic is very important when dealing with your infertility. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's in that predicament, to see them, to assess their situation, to assess what options there might be, to assist in achieving that wonderful outcome of the child that you want. If you are interested in pursuing any of the issues I've raised in this podcast with me, I'd be more than happy to see you in my rooms at St George Private Hospital at Kogarah. My room's number is 553 7555, or I can be contacted by email through m.chapman@ivf.com.au. My room's number is 9553 7555, or you can contact me by email m.chapman@ivf.com.au. And don't forget that you can access all the previous episodes by going to our website www.theivfjourney.com and select IVF Journey Podcast from the navigation menu.
Thank you for listening to the IVF Journey with Dr. Michael Chapman, the podcast which helps couples negotiate their way through the IVF journey, all the way to parenthood. You can also ask questions by contacting Dr. Chapman's rooms on 1800 111 483 or by emailing him michael.chapman@ivf.com.au.